What's good, people? Welcome to another episode of the Blitz. Post Super Bowl 55, we had our Super Bowl preview special, and now we are here back with another episode because the off season is just getting started. With us today, we've got a massive guest and a massive thank you to BBC Sports editor Rob Staten. Rob, how are you? Welcome to the Blitz.
Very good, thanks. Yeah, it's great to be here. Thanks for the invite, guys, and always good to talk some NFL. And even though the Super Bowl's finished, it's still pretty interesting at the moment.
Yeah, exactly. There's always a lot going on with this off season, and also we've got a couple of the originals from the zone. We've got Ciaran and Abbas. Ciaran, what's good, bro?
I'm good, man. I'm ready to talk football. I mean, it's all done, but still talking football.
That's even as I said. Even though the Super Bowl's done, there's still a lot to talk about. And last but not least, we've got Abbas. Abbas, how are you, bro?
I'm good. Congratulations, Tom Brady. I was rooting for you all the way. But no, I'm the same with Rob. Like, I think this is the most exciting off season we're gonna have in a long time.
And just to let you know, he wasn't rooting for Tom Brady. He did say Tom Brady would not make the playoffs. So that's an ongoing little gag he has. But let's first start, Rob. You know you're a massive Seattle Seahawks fan. As a Denver Broncos fan myself, I don't like the Seahawks. Obviously, Super Bowl 48. Don't really want to talk about that, but you know what I mean. So you can see why I don't really like the Seahawks. But after Russell Wilson's comments recently saying that he's growing frustrated with the franchise, and obviously you have a defensive-minded coach with Pete Carroll, from a Seahawks fan's perspective, what do you think is going wrong in Seattle at the moment?
I just think that Russell Wilson quite likes the idea of actually leaving the Seahawks and going to a different team. I think that he would like to go to a team with an offensive-minded head coach to have some autonomy on what they're going to do on offense. I mean, at the moment, I'm not sure if you're aware, but what happened last season basically is Russell Wilson issued the team an ultimatum before the season and said, let me run the offense that I want to do. And you may be familiar with the term let Russ cook. You know, that was the big thing on social media. And the team basically acknowledged that they were going to let him do that. The defense wasn't very good. And for the first 5 games of the season, Seattle won all 5. They let Russell Wilson lead the team because the defense was on a historically bad pace. And if it wasn't for Russell Wilson, they probably wouldn't have won any of those games. And they went 5-0. And then at the first sign of trouble, Pete Carroll said, we're not going to do that anymore. You know, Wilson had a couple of rough games against Buffalo and against the Rams. And then he exerted his control over the offense, really reined everything in. And I don't think that sat well with Russell Wilson, who had issued an ultimatum at the start of the year about how he wanted to play. So it's part philosophy. It's part seeing Tom Brady go somewhere else and say, I want Rob Gronkowski, I want Antonio Brown, I want Leonard Fournette, and getting all those guys, having a great offensive line, having a team that is essentially set up to bow to all of his demands and do what he wants to do. And then he wins the Super Bowl in his first year. And this has been brewing for some time. I don't think Russell Wilson, exiting Seattle is really as much of a surprise as maybe it is to a lot of other people, because there's been pretty consistent chatter for sort of 2 or 3 years that eventually Wilson will leave the Seahawks. It's just a question now whether it's this offseason or whether it's, a year down the line.
So the big question, do you think it will be this offseason, especially after these comments that he made? Do you feel like does Russell Wilson have one last rodeo in Seattle, or do you think this offseason, cut your losses, get rid of him now and trade and start again?
Well, it's very challenging to trade him this season just because of his contract. So at the moment, if the Seahawks were to trade him, they would essentially be paying him $39 million to play for somebody else. And they're already, pretty tight up against the cap. So, taking a huge chunk out of your cap hit to move him somewhere else is very difficult. There is a way of doing it. And what that would essentially mean is Russell Wilson giving the Seahawks $30 million and his signing bonus back. And then once the trade is finalized, the buying team could then give him a new signing bonus after the trade for $30 million. So he wouldn't be out of pocket, but it's just you have to be creative and you have to sort of do something that no one has ever done before in order to make it happen. But if he wants to leave, then he's got to be prepared to do something like that and get creative in order to get his own way. Do I think it's going to happen? I think the only way for the Seahawks to avoid it happening is to essentially sit down with Russell Wilson and say, we're going to do what you want on offense. So next year, the offense will not be structured by Pete Carroll, which is often the case. It will be by Russell Wilson and Shane Waldron, the new offensive coordinator. And then I think it will take sort of swapping some of the resource, because they've spent an awful lot of money and draft picks on the linebacker position and the safety position. It would mean transferring those resources from there to the offensive line, getting another receiver, maybe getting another tight end onto the roster so that Russell Wilson feels like he's got every opportunity to achieve everything that he wants to do. Because if you listen to Wilson at the moment, he uses the word legacy practically in every other sentence. He wants to win the MVP one day. He's never even got a vote for the MVP. He wants to win multiple Super Bowls. The Seahawks haven't been close to winning a Super Bowl since they got there last time in 2014. So there's a lot of pressure exerted from Wilson. Whether or not he can actually force the Seahawks to trade him, I'm not sure. But I feel that we're in a really delicate period now where either the Seahawks are going to cave and give Wilson what he wants, or Wilson is going to ask to go.
Abbas, I know, especially at the start of the season during our podcast, we were raving about Seattle, saying that they're at the start when they were 5-0. We were saying they're one of the best teams in the NFC West, and obviously they crumbled. But what do you feel like the reason was, looking at it from an outside perspective? What do you feel like went wrong at Seattle?
I think what went wrong is kind of alluding to what Rob's point is with Pete Carroll taking back the offense. If you look historically, Pete Carroll's not a fan of turnovers. He likes to obviously be the type of guy to control the ball and understand that his quarterback's not going to make turnovers, then keeping the play. And Russell Wilson started doing that. But he started doing that because he had the offense himself. And I think when that happens, Pete Carroll resides to the fact that, look, now we're going to go back to how I'm playing. We're going to limit turnovers, which actually hampered, in some cases, Russell Wilson's production and his numbers, which for me stopped him from being in that MVP race, whereas quarterbacks like Aaron Rodgers probably excelled a bit more. I think where it kind of went wrong, there's two faults for me, but it's been brewing. The first thing was run the ball against New England when they passed it. And I think I think a lot of people have talked about the fact that Marshawn Lynch should have run the ball. And I think had that happened, you would have been looking now Russell Wilson 2 Super Bowls compared to 1. I think now we look at quarterbacks, and we always say, if you've got 1 Super Bowl, are you as good? Because the measuring stick's now so high. Tom Brady's out on his own, but then aside from that, then you look at it, it's like you need 2 for, like you said, the point of legacy. And second is a trade that I don't think a lot of people talk about as much, and that was the Jimmy Graham Max Unger trade that happened. And when that did happen, I felt like I wasn't too much of a fan because I knew Max Unger went to when we got him for the Saints, and Jimmy Graham's production was okay for Seattle, but it was never replicated the same way at New Orleans. And then the first round pick, that didn't really material anything for us. I think certain things like that didn't help Seattle. And then there was a level of complacency, and I think you could probably help me on this as well, where, like you said, they looked up on the defense and never really did much to protect Russell Wilson, because I think they felt that this was a quarterback. I wouldn't say it was indestructible, but had the leg, had the arms, and he was able to be that new style of quarterback. And now if you look, the run quarterback, the more elusive quarterbacks, your Mahomes, Lamar Jacksons, Deshaun Watsons are in, and they're younger than Russell Wilson. And Russell Wilson's not a young quarterback anymore. There's only so much his body can handle. And it is a growing frustration. At the end of the day, the amount of times he gets hit, he gets sacked, stuff that can only do too much on your body. And if I'm Russell Wilson as well, I look for trade as well, because there's nothing wrong against it. And his image as Russell Wilson, when you look at him, he's a father, a husband, did that GQ magazine recently. He's a man of faith. Like, he has the perfect image as a person. And it shouldn't be tainted on him if he tries to request this trade. But that's where Seattle can't make it look ugly, where it makes his image look bad as well. And I think Russell Wilson, I'm not going to say will look into that, but I think a little small factor of whether he gets traded this season or not as well, whether his image gets a play into it.
Ciaran, what about you? Do you feel like if Russell tries and leaves, do you feel like it would kind of ruin his legacy at Seattle, or do you feel like Seattle would still love him for giving him that Super Bowl ring?
I think as a whole, like, Seattle fans will be indebted to him with the fact that he came in, he won a Super Bowl, what was it, his second year or whatever, the same as Patrick Mahomes has done in Kansas City. He's pretty much got them to every season. They seem to be in the same sort of position where they're in the running. So it's the same every year, that they're sort of there or thereabouts. So I feel like if he was to request a trade at this point, he wouldn't be tainting his legacy at all. I think he's done what he can do up to this point. Obviously, this year they got to the playoffs. They didn't push on like sometimes you see with him. But yeah, I don't think it's going to be that if he wants to get traded away, he's going to taint his legacy. We're seeing it more often now. Obviously, we see the Deshaun Watson thing where he wants to get traded away. And obviously, Tom Brady's just gone somewhere and made a team for himself. There's a lot more at the minute, like there is in the NBA, where players can just decide where they want to go. And I think that should be the case. And he should be able to just say, okay, I've been here for however many years. I've done all I can. And now it's time for me to go somewhere else. And I don't think the Seahawks can have any quarrels with the fact that he doesn't want to be there anymore, if that is the case.
No, I totally agree with you. I feel like, especially with the way Tom Brady done it, and now with the whole situation with Deshaun, I feel like, and I hopefully feel that within the NFL there should be more player power for people like Russell Wilson. Because if we look at his stats, right, Russell Wilson's been sacked 394 times in his career. Now, to put that in perspective, Tom Brady's been sacked 500 times. Russell Wilson came in 2012, right? In 2012 he came in, and Tom Brady's been in the league for over 500 years. I mean, not 500 years, but you know what I mean? Tom Brady's been in the league for a very long time, and he's only 100 or so sacks away from Russell Wilson. This guy gets sacked way too many times. He got sacked this season, a minimum of 40 times. And if you compare that to Tom Brady's only been sacked 40 times twice in his 20-year career. And 1 year, and one of the years was his first full season. So it just goes to show, like, I don't get it. Because I'm being critical of the Seahawks here, and I know the Seahawks don't have the Legion of Boom anymore. The defense is not as good as it used to be. But if we have Russell Wilson is a good quarterback. The fact that he hasn't been voted for an MVP is still blasphemy, in my opinion, and he's a good enough quarterback to be mentioned up there. He's a top 10 quarterback, right? I feel like we can all agree on his day he's a top 10 quarterback. But to not have a quarterback, when you have a quarterback like that, the first thing you need to do is help him, protect. A quarterback's best friend is their offensive line. I'm sorry, Seattle's offensive line is not good enough. I don't care how elusive Russell is. We saw the way Mahomes was getting peppered against Tampa Bay the other day. Russell Wilson looked at that game and said, that happens to me in like week 14 and week 13 when no one cares about it. That happens to me every day. And I can see why he's getting frustrated, because he needs help. It's not like Seattle, it's not like a Tom Brady situation where Tom Brady was in New England and we couldn't even name one of his receivers going towards the end of his career, right? And he was making Danny Amendola look good. Seattle have decent receivers. You have Tyler Lockett, you have DK Metcalf, who, listen, he's got the physical specimen. He's a massive physical specimen. Tyler Lockett and Russell Wilson have great chemistry. So it's not like you don't have that many. Obviously, yes, you can improve that offense greatly, but it's not like you're very depleted with weapons. I feel like the offensive line is the main problem here. And the problem that Seattle have is that they barely have any cap space this season. They don't have that much. I feel like they have, only a couple million or so to change it. I'm not sure, or Robbie, if you can help me out here. I think there's only like two or 4 million to work with, cap space wise. Yeah, so 2 or 4 million to work with, and I really don't know how that's gonna help the Seahawks. Maybe they get a couple tackles and a couple guards in or whatever, but they need to help this guy, because at the end of the day, as Rob said, we're talking about his legacy here, and if you're going to keep going at Russell Wilson and the Seahawks are just going to be a mere team like they have been for the past, that's going to ruin his legacy, because he's a top 10 quarterback in my opinion, and I know he's fast, I know he's elusive, I know he's got really good pocket presence, but doesn't mean he has to show it. I feel like quarterbacks want to throw rather than run. They don't mind running and throwing, but you want to throw rather than run. Do you know what I mean? And I feel like they need to protect him. How they do that in the offseason, that's another story. But if they don't, I feel like he should leave. I don't know where he wants to go. That's up to him. But if they don't protect him, he has to leave, because he can't wait. He's what, over 30 now, right?
32.
Yeah.
Is it
32 now? So, and if you're getting sacked 394 times and you're only 32, you're not playing until you're 40. I'll tell you that for free. You're not going to do a Tom Brady and play until you're 43. So he needs to be protected if he wants to have that legacy that he so craves.
See, now I'm just going to ask Rob this question, because we keep talking about the Seattle team, the Seattle organization. But when you watch Russell Wilson, is there things that you look at with him that you say that frustrates you about him, that you think, don't do this, and that way you can save yourself? Or is it solely on Seattle's organization themselves and how they've gone about with Russell Wilson and his latter year so far.
Well, I think the one thing you've got to remember with Russell is that he's what used to be known as a scrambling quarterback. I mean, there's a lot more of those these days. I mean, like every quarterback who comes into the league is looking for mobile quarterbacks who are elusive, that can extend plays and then can do the whole Mahomes act of throw in from difficult angles on the run. That is what the league is generally looking for. Now, with Wilson, that one thing we have to remember here is that a lot of these sacks that we're talking about are situations where, for example, Russell Wilson is always good for about 10 sacks per season, where he decides he's going to take off and run from in the pocket, and then he gets brought down on the 1 yard short of the line of scrimmage, and it gets listed as a sack. Now, that is not the same as Tom Brady being sacked, and the difference between Brady is that he came through in New England in a system where you are basically told one hitch maximum, that's it. That means when you're hitching, that means that you're stepping up into the pocket one step and then you throw. It's basically the ball has to be in your hands for the minimal amount of time. And Russell Wilson's style of play is almost hold the ball as long as you can, Russell, because if you can create a bit of magic in the pocket, somebody will get open, we can throw it downfield. And that's partly because of who Wilson is, and that's just the style of play that suits him. And that's part of the style that Seattle chose to play with Russell Wilson, because Pete Carroll loves explosive pass plays that get the ball downfield, big chunk yardage. That is what he likes as much as running the ball with physicality. So he's tried to incorporate that, and it works with Wilson's skill set. But Wilson, and I think, having seen every single one of Russell Wilson's games in Seattle, yes, he does do things that you just think, come on, Rush, you've got to get the ball out quicker there. He will sit in the pocket, and he did an interview this week, and he said, and someone questioned him on that, because he was challenging his offensive line and said, could you do anything differently? And his answer was, I could get the ball out a lot quicker, but some of those plays turn into touchdowns. And that's the kind of give and take that you have with Russell Wilson. You kind of want him to hold on to the ball a little bit longer, because that's often when the magic happens. But him holding on to the ball longer means he gets sacked a lot more.
Yeah, so I think I'm with you on that, but because the way I've described elusive quarterbacks and holding onto the ball and doing partial Hail Mary throws is, I consider that dangerous football myself. And at one point, it catches up to you eventually. I was consistent about this with Mahomes, with how he used to play. I think the only thing is, like I said, when Russell Wilson came into the league, I wouldn't say it was alien, but it was new and it was different. Whereas now a lot of quarterbacks have caught up to the way and the standard of the way the new quarterback should be played. I just think, for me, when I watch Russell Wilson, I'm a bit like yourselves. I just sometimes think he's doing a little too much, but that obviously goes to the fact that sometimes his receivers aren't open. I still do believe, though, that in Seattle, he has a good connection with Metcalf. And I think that's another good 1-2 combo punch that can help them do something. It's just, for me, with Seattle, Tony's right. I'm always, if there's a team I do not want to play as a Saints fan, it's Seattle. More than any other team, I don't want to go to Seattle at any point in the season, especially in the playoffs, and play them. But sometimes I feel like it's a lot easier for teams such as the Rams and stuff, because obviously they play in the division, for them to play them. Whereas someone like myself, who is a Saints fan, if we play the Seattle Seahawks, we're susceptible to them to lose to them. But I think there's a little block. There's some kind of mental block that doesn't allow the Seattle Seahawks to get over that hump. And it could be the fact that obviously Russell gets or like you said, there's only so much Seattle can come from behind, because you can pass on that easily. And I feel like there needs to be some kind of a balance. And I think Seattle are in a really bad situation right now. It's not something I expected from them.
I was going to say, don't you feel like, as Rob said, when Russell Wilson has the ball, when he has the ball for like 10 seconds in the pocket and he's looking for someone, and then Tyler Lockett gets open like in the edge of the end zone and it's a toe tap and it's a touchdown, like that's where Russell's magic happens. Do you not feel like, as an organization, as an offensive coordinator, we said, okay, listen, this is how you play, right? This is where majority of your magic happens. Let's cater to you. Because at the end of the day, like I can tell you for free, I've seen so many bombs from Russell Wilson to Tyler Lockett, and I'm thinking, how has he got that? How has he had the time, and he's scrambled and he's done it? So do you not feel like with a better offensive line, Because at the end of the day, when he's still scrambling, the offensive line is still doing their job. And they're still actively looking, trying to protect him at all costs. But do you not feel like with a better offensive line, he can get away with playing the way he plays, and it benefits him? Because if you listen, at the end of the day, as much as the NFL is a 52-man roster, you're only as good as your quarterback, right? And the quarterback's only as good as their offensive line. Like your quarterback, your offensive line is like your foundation of a house, right? You can't be a very good quarterback without a half decent offensive line. So do you not feel like, as much as we all know what Russell's capable of, but the reason he's playing like this is solely due to the offensive line? Like, where do the changes where do they need to be made? Is it this specific person on left tackle? Is it just the way they're playing, or do you think it's the whole scheme they have to now cater towards Russell Wilson? Like, is it rather the scheme or the players?
I think what if you asked Russell Wilson what he wants to do, he would say he would want to play with tempo. They want to really go after teams quite quickly in games, and they want to try and score points. And he wants to take shots, and he wants to sort of play with an element of pace and mix in these. One of the things the Seahawks did very early in the season was they would go into the 2-minute drill, in the third drive of the game, and they were just sort of mixing the tempos, and that was very good, and it worked. And what Pete Carroll wants to do is he wants to keep things close. He wants to mesh the special teams, the defense, or the offense. He's quite happy to go 3 and out, punt the ball, trust his defense to get the ball back, shorten the game, absorb time with the running game, try and reduce it to a low-scoring game. And he thinks in that situation, Russell Wilson can be the difference in a 17-14 thriller. But Wilson doesn't want to do that. Wilson wants to, score 30, 40 points. He wants to play in the way that the Chiefs and the Rams and, some of these other teams do. And that's the difference there. So that's what Wilson wants. In terms of how they go about doing it, I think the O-line does stand to be improved. I mean, Dwayne Brown's a very good left tackle. Damian Lewis was a very good right guard as a rookie. Brandon Shell did a much better job than anybody expects as a free agent signing at right tackle. Left guard and centre, they can make some improvements though, and I think that's certainly an area, whether it's the draft, whether they're able to free up some resource to bring in a really good left guard or a centre, Corey Linsley, maybe, or Brandon Scherf, Joe Toni, players like that. It's a very good draft coming up for interior offensive linemen. You can find a lot of good options there. That is really an area they need to improve, but they also need a weapon. I mean, if they signed Philip Dorsett to be their number 3 receiver, he didn't play it down last year because of injury. They signed Josh Gordon, he didn't play it down in football because of suspensions. Russell wanted Antonio Brown. There was a whole week of talk that Antonio Brown was going to come into Seattle, then he signed for Tampa Bay and won a Super Bowl. So he wants that third weapon as well. So it's a combination of things. It's tempo, it's philosophy on offense, it's improved offensive line play, and it's another weapon. And if Seattle will give him all of those things, then there's a chance that this can still be salvaged. If the Seahawks just say, pipe down, Russell, we've got this, then Russell's going to probably hand in a trade request.
Well, this is the thing, and I totally agree with you, because I feel like that's how Russell and Seattle should play. And when you said like how Pete Carroll plays, how he wants to have a 17-14 thriller, trust his defense, this isn't the Legion of Boom anymore. Do you know what I mean? Like, and Ciaran, you can help me out on this as well. Like, do you not feel like I think we can all agree that this is not the Legion of Boom anymore. Their defense is not as good as it used to be. So surely you'd have to change your mindset. And I know Pete Carroll, I wouldn't say he's very old, but he's the oldest coach in the league, isn't he?
He turns 70 this year.
Yeah, he turns 70. Yeah, he's the oldest coach in the league, and I don't want to say nothing bad about old people, but like if they're a firm believer, if it's not broken, don't fix it, right? So do you not feel like he might need to get with the times? Because at the end of the day, as much as yes, he has a scrambling QB, but you barely see scrambling QBs. No, not you barely see scrambling QBs anymore. They're not called scrambling; they're just called quarterbacks now. Yeah. I see Josh Allen running like Prime Lamar, but no one really talks about it because he's not known as a scrambling QB. Like you can look at Trevor Lawrence, look at Justin Fields going to come up in the draft. These guys are going to run. I saw who got drafted? What's his name? Joe
Burrow.
Joe Burrow. I saw Joe Burrow. His first touchdown was a rushing touchdown. Do you know what I mean? I'm not saying we're seeing way more Q quarterbacks run compared to when we first started watching the NFL, right? Where it was just protect me, let me sit in my little pocket and throw 30 yards and touchdown. So do you not feel like Pete Carroll kind of needs to change his scheme, realize, okay, I don't have the Legion of Boom anymore. I still have a half decent defense, but it's not the same. I kind of need to cater towards my quarterback. I need to change the way I play because this is clearly not helping the team.
Well, I think you've got this situation where there's a discrepancy between the way that Pete Carroll wants to play and the way that Russell Wilson wants to play. And Rob said all these, Russell Wilson wants this and Russell Wilson wants this. Russell Wilson's got a very big contract, so they don't really have the cap space to bring in all of these pieces that Russell Wilson wants. So you say, okay, then Russell Wilson wants a better O-line. Well, you don't really have the money to go out and get a better left guard or whatever. Okay, draft one. The Seahawks have the 56th overall pick in the draft. They don't have a first round pick because that obviously went, I think it was in the Jamal Adams trade. So you're not going to get one of these elite linemen. So you've got this situation where you can't really improve to the point that Russell Wilson might want you to, because we don't really have the money that, you can't, because you can't afford to. Whereas Pete Carroll's very happy to just say, okay, we've got this situation, and if Russell Wilson doesn't like it, then maybe Russell Wilson might want to go somewhere else. And then you've got this situation where if you do trade Russell Wilson, you've obviously got the cap hit, which isn't good for them. And you're either wanting to get a quarterback in a trade, which I don't think you're going to see a trade like the Jared Goff, Matt Stafford one, where two similar quarterbacks, like in terms of, they're both decent, quite good, like playoff standard quarterbacks, but aren't, the upper echelons of quarterback. Or you want a decent pick where you can find a quarterback. Now, I don't think there's going to be many teams that are going to give you like a top 10, top 15 pick, unless you're giving them, you're obviously giving them Russell Wilson, but unless it's a very good trade. So you're not going to get like your Justin Fields or like your Zach Wilsons, because they're going to be gone in the top 10. So you're looking at like Mac Jones, Kyle Trask. They're the kind of, it's either that, or you're not gonna play Geno Smith, who's had like 6,000 yards in 7 years or whatever. It's just a situation where there's some things wrong, and I don't think there's an answer where everyone's going to be happy. It's either Pete Carroll's not going to be particularly happy, or probably the more likely answer is Russell Wilson's not really going to be very happy.
Can I just introduce this thought? Part of the problem is that the Seahawks, their owner Paul Allen passed away a couple of years ago, and his sister Jody Allen inherited the team. And the franchise at the moment is in a holding pattern because Jody Allen is not the long-term owner of the Seahawks. In the next 3 to 5 years, somebody will buy the Seahawks and there will be a new ownership. And she is essentially given Pete Carroll a 5-year contract extension to see through to this, in this transition period now where the team is going to go from one ownership structure to another one. And Pete Carroll has been given the control to pretty much run the football operations with John Schneider, the general manager. Now, this is Pete Carroll's last dance for the NFL. This is probably his last contract. I think it's somewhat fair to say. And he's going to want to do everything how he wants to do it. That was the whole point of him coming back to the NFL. That's what he's done for the last 10 years. I do things my way because that's what I do, and I've got the control. And I'm only back in the NFL because I was afforded that. And the problem you've got now is you've got Russell Wilson, who's 33 in November, and he's saying, well, I might only have 6-7 more years left in my career. I want to play for 10, 15 years more, but I might not. Phillip Rivers just retired at the age of 39. I might only have 6-7 years left at the top. I want to be able to win Super Bowls. I want to be able to win MVPs. I want to be known as statistically as one of the best quarterbacks to ever play the game. And my philosophy and your philosophy don't mesh. And if you're going to be here for the next 3, 4, 5 years, that's the rest of the peak of my career. By in 2 years' time, people will call Russell Wilson an aging quarterback. So I think this is why we're hearing about this now, is that Wilson feels a sense of urgency to get somewhere where he can do what he wants, be given the power that he craves, and he doesn't really want to be part of the Pete Carroll show anymore. And that's the problem the Seahawks are going to have to do. Is there a compromise between the two? Maybe, but at the moment, it's looking particularly fraught.
So let's say, Rob, the draft comes up. You're the GM of the Seahawks. It's your team. With that 56th pick, who are you taking, and how is that going to improve the Seahawks the way as a fan would want it? Because I know, listen, if I was the GM for the Broncos tomorrow, I've got my picks ready. I know how I'm going to improve the franchise. So I'm saying, as a fan, from a fan's perspective, what do you feel like the Seahawks need to do, and where do they need to draft, and who?
Well, the first thing they need to do is get some more picks because they've only got 4 picks. Now, they will not have 4 picks when the draft starts. I'm telling you that, you know, they will find a way somehow, whether that's trading Jamal Adams, whether that is tagging Shaquille Griffin and turning that around into a 3rd round pick, maybe depending on what the market is for him. They will enable themselves to get more picks. But then, you know, looking at the draft, it's a very rich draft for interior offensive linemen and wide receivers, which is helpful for the Seahawks. You know, you've got a whole host of interior guys, whether that's someone like Quinn Miners, who had a fantastic Senior Bowl. You've got, you know, Trey Smith at Tennessee, who's a guard with a lot of upside, you know, for the next level. You've got Aaron Banks at Notre Dame, who's another fantastic left guard. Dante Smith, David Moore, Landon Dickerson, Creed Humphrey. You've got a whole bunch of really talented interior offensive linemen in this draft. So if the Seahawks want to draft a center or a guard and sign a center and a guard, they can do that. They're going to have to do something, though, over the next few weeks because, you know, as you mentioned, they have $2 million of cap space. They can't even give Poona Ford, who's probably their best defender last year, a 2nd-round tender to keep him at the moment. So they need to create at least $10 to $15 million. How they're going to do that is going to be very, very interesting because it could be a Russell Wilson trade, or it could be Bobby Wagner gets traded, or it could be Carlos Dunlap gets cut or traded, or it could be Jamal Adams gets traded, or there could be a combination of these things. We could see players extended to try and lower their cap hits. We may see players push money down the line and essentially using the credit card. But the Seahawks are not in any position whatsoever right now to enter an off-season in terms of free agency or the draft. So they've got to do some things. And, you know, from a Seahawks perspective, especially someone who writes a blog that specializes in the off-season, it's fascinating because we're kind of wondering what's going to happen next, knowing full well that something is going to happen next.
Abbas, do you feel like there's anything you feel like the Seahawks can add as well?
For me, like you guys have touched on, you need to obviously sort out the offensive line. But what I keep hearing about this is the cap space, this, that, with Pete Carroll and how long he's got left. And the way I'm looking at everything is Seattle, for me, whilst I've watched the NFL for as long as I've had, they've never gone into what I would recall as a full rebuild whilst having Russell Wilson. So now, I would personally, if I'm Seattle, look at the idea of a full rebuild. Put yourself in a position when the new ownership does come in, Pete Carroll leaves, you're in a spot where, okay, you may have taken a hit for a season or two, but now you're back, you are leading the charge in the NFC, and you go forward from there. And I think it's not wrong to do that. It's just smart. It's just trying to be smart about it. I look at Seattle that way now because I think the points you guys have made, for what I've just been able to understand and think in my head, it's a conflict of interest in terms of both playing styles and in terms of what a team requires versus what a quarterback requires. So it's not anything positive for me. The way I would personally look at it is try to initiate a genuine rebuild through the draft, like you said. But obviously, like you said, 4 picks. But if you start looking at trading players who hold a bit more value in the actual team, you could possibly get some picks for them. And I would personally look at it that way. I'd initiate some form of an actual rebuild instead of just trying to acquire a couple of talents and trying to make another Super Bowl run, because there's a few teams in reality when the season continues and it dwindles down that are a lot better than the Seattle Seahawks. And I don't know if that's a route that they could possibly take, because I know from what I've seen, the Seattle Seahawks, they're not a franchise that will allow themselves to have a losing record anyway. But I would personally run a rebuild type of structure.
Do you feel it's, and Ciaran, you can answer this as well, or anyone can, do you feel like, because I know with rebuilding in the NFL, especially with a team like myself, the Broncos, we go through rebuilds. We've been going through a rebuild since Peyton left. So I don't think Seattle are there just yet. I feel like, yes, they do need to make a lot of personnel changes, but I feel like a rebuild is, because they're still a good enough team. God, they went 5-0, right? And I know, listen, the regular season means nothing. I saw the Steelers going 11-0, so regular season doesn't mean that much. But we saw glimpses, right? I remember when you and I were talking in the pod and I think it was the Seattle-Arizona game. And I think it was the one that Arizona just won with. I was saying, like, you know what, as much as like the NFC West is not a bad division, right? It's not a bad division. And you've got a lot of I feel like they still have the best quarterback in that division.
Yeah, 100%.
Like, so I feel for any team, if you have the best quarterback in your division, you can't go through a rebuild. You have, like, fair enough that you got to make some personnel changes. You maybe have to cut like a Carlos Dunlap, as Rob said, or maybe even Bobby Wagner. Maybe it's his time as well. It's not the Bobby Wagner we used to know back in the day. It happens. Father time catches up with everyone if you're LeBron, unless you're LeBron James or Tom Brady. But at the same time, do you not feel like a rebuild is a bit too much? Because they're not as bad. They're not as bad as we think. Obviously, there are little tweaks in there, and
that's what I was going to say. When I say rebuild, I don't mean strip the entire team.
You don't mean like tank for Lawrence and stuff like that?
No, nothing like that. No, I don't mean tank. What I mean is essentially try to use some of the better assets to get more assets, and still try to be competitive. I'm not one for complete tanking, because if I was a fan of that team, I could not sit through a 17-game regular season schedule knowing that my team is literally playing for 1 to 2 wins like the Jags and the Jets were this season. Still don't know how the Jets actually messed this up, but they ended up somehow going from not winning a single game to winning, I think, 2 games. So I don't know how they've done it, but they really messed up Trevor Lawrence. Aside from that, like, I think if you can, you trade assets to try to get yourself in a position to be competitive, but understanding that you're not in a position to win. In some case, I look at the way Miami are right now. Miami is, for me, a Deshaun Watson away from being that team, because they're okay. They've got some good young pieces. They've got a good defense. And that's where I personally would look at Seattle without Russell Wilson, if that makes sense.
Well, you feel like they'll need a decent backup, because let's say they get a backup in, I don't know, someone like Jacoby Brissett, right? You give him like $6 million or so. They've still got so many holes to fill.
Yeah,
guards, centers, even a running back and a bit of the defensive line.
I like Chris Carson. I don't mind the running. That's another thing, though. Seattle were without a running back for a lot of the season as well. So that obviously then it makes you in some form one-dimensional. But
no, true, and especially with Pete Carroll, like we all know how much he loves the run game.
So I guess you could say from that point, when the running back came in, there was a bit more to the Seattle offense. It's just, for me, it sounds stupid as it sounds. The LA Rams are that bogey team for them because they can play them so well. And I think because when they matched up in the playoffs, it was one of them like Seattle at home, but where are you going? And a lot of people are still picking the Rams as well. I just think for me, Seattle has to look at, okay, like Rob said as well, they're not in a position to do a lot. Put yourself in a position with certain assets that you have to improve yourself whilst even trying to keep hold of the quarterback. It's literally finding a compromise for me. And I think Seattle's possibly, it's a lot harder for them because it's just stylistically, it doesn't look like Pete Carroll and Russell Wilson can work as much as they used to.
So what, one has to go, either Pete or Russell?
I don't think Pete will go because, like Rob said, Pete's not going to go. But I mean, try to see how, if you can, try to keep Russell happy by showing him a plan of, if we get rid of this, this, and this, but we try to move this and get you help here, here, and here. Is that possible? And I think it's a case of, you just have to sit and look through everything and try to even get yourself. It's going to be hard. See if you can somehow formulate a first-round pick or another second-round pick as well. Instead of, if you can't get a first round, try to get yourself a second-round pick. So you have 2 in the second round.
But before we quickly wrap up, do we feel like going into the off-season, I know this is quite far-fetched to say, because as you said, this is going to be a massive, massive, massive off-season for the Seahawks. Do you feel like they'll be back in the playoffs regardless? If they have this, do you feel like they'll be back in the playoffs in the wild card, or do you feel like they have to do something now to even stand a chance to? Because obviously the Rams are going to make moves. The Rams already made moves with Matthew Stafford. I'm not sure whether it's a better move, but that's a conversation for another day. But do you not feel like the Seahawks do they have to do a lot to stay competitive in that division, or do you feel like it's too late? They're just going to have to try and make something work.
I'd let someone else take this first, and then I'll get my view.
I think if they have Russell Wilson, then they usually have a base. They've never had less than 9 wins. So, they will. If Wilson is still there, then they will have a very good chance of making the playoffs. Whether they'll actually do anything in the playoffs or not remains to be seen, because they're very good at getting to the playoffs and then swiftly exiting them without creating much of a scene. And then if Wilson goes, then it's very difficult to predict. But it's a very difficult situation because, as you said, they quite rightly said, they've got the best quarterback in the division, and in most circumstances, teams would just see to him and say, what do you want to do, Russ? Let's make this work because you are the crown jewel. But in Seattle, it's Pete Carroll is the man who will ultimately have final say on everything, and there's nobody giving him a dig in the ribs saying, Pete, you've got to cede a bit of control here. There's no Paul Allen figure like there used to be to tell Pete what to do. I mean, a few years ago, Paul Allen, the owner who passed, told Pete Carroll that he had to introduce somebody onto his defensive staff who was completely different from his philosophy, and it wasn't one of his people, just to offer a difference of opinion. It was Mike Pettin, who was the Green Bay defensive coordinator last year. And Mike Pettin in 2017 essentially was on Seattle staff, but was shoved into some corporate box somewhere watching the games. And Pete, I don't really think took that seriously.
Yeah.
But that was Paul Allen trying to hold Pete a little bit to account. And Paul Allen was very much more hands-on than people realize. I mean, he wasn't picking the draft picks or saying who they should sign like a Jerry Jones type, but he was very much like, you keep me up to date with what's going on, and I want to tell you what I think about our team. And if he was here now, I think Paul Allen would just go, I'm having this, let's sort this out, and he would sort it.
Yeah.
But without him there's nobody to do that, and I do fear for how this is going to work out. And look, if Wilson's still there, they'll have a chance to get the playoffs. It's a very tough division, but Wilson is that good that he will get there. And if Wilson goes somewhere else, I get the sense that for him, the two teams that he'd most likely to go to are Saints or the Raiders. Then those two teams will be instantly, contenders within the AFC or the NFC. Seattle is in that ballpark because they have Wilson, but in order to actually become a serious playoff threat, the Seahawks are going to have to improve their weapons. They're going to have to improve their defense. They're spending money in positions that are not important, where they're not spending enough on the O-line and the D-line. As a Seahawks fan, it pains me to say it, but they're a million miles away from the Super Bowl.
I'm just going to echo that. If you keep Russell Wilson, you make the playoffs, but if you don't, you don't. If you lose him, then 100%, I think you might finish bottom of your division. If as a Saints fan, if we got Russell Wilson, let me tell you now, what day is it today? February 14th. We would win the Super Bowl. I say this every season, to be fair, anyway. But if we got Russell Wilson as our quarterback, considering, and I say this respectfully to how much I love Breeze anyway, if we had old man Breeze who couldn't throw, if we got Russell Wilson as our quarterback, 100%, we could end up with 14-2, maybe 15-1 regular season record, then go on with the Super Bowl. We might even lose that one game.
I don't want to burst your bubble, but as much as I feel like the Saints are a good team, the Saints are still the Saints. Regardless of Drew Brees or Russell Wilson, I don't think Russell Wilson will definitely not get you 15-1 with the Saints. And I think obviously, listen, the Saints are a better team than the Seahawks, but I don't see you guys winning the Super Bowl. I still don't see you getting out of the NFC. In all person,
no, with him we would.
I don't think you will beat Tampa Bay if Russell Wilson went to the Seahawks, but that's just all ifs, It's just
I literally echo. If I'm honest, just to wrap it up quickly with my side, I'll echo what Rob said. If you keep him, you should make the playoffs, but then it's you'll just get knocked out early unless some magical thing happen where even home field advantage, it just depends on your matchup. But if you're without him, you probably won't make the playoffs. I kind of liken the situation that we were saying about the owner and Pete Carroll situation to Bill Belichick and Robert quarterback debate they had with Tom Brady. But yeah, with this case as well, it's kind of that simple, really. But yeah, no, I'm now going to look into anything as possible for a Seahawks Saints trade, because yeah, I'd be really happy with that.
Can I just ask, Rob, what would you want if Russell Wilson was to get traded? What do you think would be fair as like collateral in that trade for you to get back?
That's a good question, that, because I'm sort of, part of me sort of would immediately have to compare it to what they paid for Jamal Adams. So if a blitzing safety is worth 2 firsts, a third, and a veteran player, which is what the Seahawks gave up, what's Russell Wilson worth? And the other thing I have to sort of consider here is that little known rule, but you can't actually trade draft picks beyond subsequent 2 drafts. So you've got this draft and the next 2. So unless you're the Dolphins, the Jets, or the Jaguars, who have got multiple first-round picks this year, or now the Detroit Lions, who have got the Rams picks for the next 2 years after this one, you're capped off at 3 first-round picks. That's the absolute maximum that you could get from somebody. So what would I be comfortable with? Something in that range. The 3. It would have to be 3 first. It would have to be a team willing to give up on first-round picks in the way the Rams have in order to have a great quarterback. The Saints, the Raiders, Cowboys. Mike Florio has been saying the Cowboys may well go there. I was listening to something earlier that was a radio show in Dallas hinting that Dak Prescott's injuries maybe not quite healing as would have hoped, and that maybe the Cowboys will end up looking at alternatives this offseason, and maybe Russell Wilson is a convenient alternative for them. Hey, maybe the Seahawks then signed Dak Prescott, who knows? But you've got these teams, and if they gave up 3 firsts, then great. I mean, personally, it would be ideal to find a team that could give you a quarterback in return. So with the Raiders, whether that was Derek Carr, whether that was Marcus Mariota, at least you've got a body in the building who you could say, well, if nothing else, you're going into the season with Marcus Mariota, who played quite well for the Raiders when he had that spot duty last season. Or you've got Derek Carr, who, is Derek Carr, isn't he? But he could be a lot worse. And then with the Cowboys, you're not getting that. And with the Saints, I'm not particularly enamored with, Taysom Tebow. I think that I think that we'll pass on that. But that's kind of the you're talking about. You want picks, and you want potentially something in return that enables the Seahawks to at least have a bit of a go next year with a quarterback. Whether that means that you end up picking in the top 10 and can get a good quarterback. Although personally, I'm not as convinced that Zach Wilson and Justin Fields are even as that much better than Kellen Mond, for example, at Texas A&M. So who knows?
And the thing is, as we saw with the Goff and Stafford trade, what's going to happen? As you said, if Russell Wilson goes, he's going to have to go 3 first-round picks, right? So imagine what Deshaun is going to go for.
Yeah,
that's what I was just thinking. Like, one, that if that trade happens, maybe you guys trade for Deshaun. I don't know how it will work out cap-wise and trade-wise and everything. But who knows? Who knows? Because at the end of the day, I feel like now with the way, I feel like that trade has really just kind of ruined the NFL, in my opinion. Because not ruined the NFL, but you know what I mean? 2 first-round picks and a second for Matthew Stafford's, which.
And the quarterback. You got to put the quarterback in there as well.
Yeah. But I feel like you could trade Jared Goff for Matthew Stafford. I don't think anyone would have butt an eyelid if that was a like-for-like trade. I don't think anyone would be like, oh, they won this trade or they lost this trade. I practically feel like they both have the same ceiling. Maybe Matthew Stafford might have a bit of a higher ceiling because of stats-wise. But, if I had Megatron, I would have inflated stats too. But that's just my opinion. Anyway, but we're going to wrap up there. Rob, what we normally do at the end of our pod, we normally let our guests shout out anything they've got going on. So by all means, feel free to plug yourself.
Well, thanks. I run on top of the BBC stuff. I run a blog which is called Seahawks Draft Blog, which is practically a second full-time job, and I have a very patient wife who allows me to do this, despite the fact we have 2 kids and 2 dogs. So yeah, I run that, and and it's called Seahawks Draft Blog, but we talk about everything, from Russell Wilson's future, free agency, draft, game reviews, everything like that. It's a very busy, thriving community. There's a whole bunch of people on there who comment, and I think it's the best place to chat Seahawks on the internet. So if you want to check that out, then go for it. Twitter at Rob Staten, and I have a YouTube channel where I've been doing some podcasts for several months now, and I've been interviewing some of the draft prospects who are going to be in this draft. So I've done one with Quinn Miners, who, if people saw the Senior Bowl with his belly hanging out, they'll remember him. He was particularly interesting, to be like David Moore, Lee McNeil, who's going to go very early. Just the one with Dante Smith, it was great, really good left tackle prospect. So there's all that on YouTube as well.
Sweet. And guys, thank you for watching another episode of The Blitz. As you can see, I don't even have to say it now because we have a banner where you can now follow us on Twitter and Instagram, subscribe to us on Twitch. This has been another episode of The Blitz. Thank you. I was going to say good night. It's good night if you're watching this before you go to bed, but thank you very much, guys. Peace out.